If I could have your attention. You're all very welcome to this, our 8th seminar in the Hosting the Stranger series. Tonight we have 2 visiting speakers, Fanny Howe, the poet, and Amy Hollywood, the author and academic from Harvard Divinity School. I'll be introducing them both in turn as they speak in a moment. But firstly, I just want to show a brief video collage that was made by some of the students involved in the project. And some of you who were at the conference at the weekend on interreligious hospitality will have seen a version of this, an earlier version. And some of the people involved are actually in the room today, so I take my hat off to them. But it's a short sort of 10-minute video collage, and then we will move on to the 2 respective papers under the title as, Sacred Eros Hosting Uninvited Guests. But first, the video collage.
שיר השירים אשר לשלמה. Oh, that you would kiss me with the kisses of your mouth. Draw me after you, let us make haste. The king has brought me into his chambers. I am dark, but I am beautiful.
You have ravished my heart, my sister, my bride. You have ravished my heart with a glance of your eyes. How much better is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your oils than any spice. Your lips distill nectar, my bride. Honey and milk are under your tongue. The scent of your garments is like the scent of Lebanon. A garden locked is my sister, my bride. A garden locked, a fountain sealed, a garden fountain, a well of living water and flowing streams from Lebanon.
I am my beloved, and my beloved is mine. He pastures his flock among the lilies. As an apple tree among the trees of the wood, so is my beloved, and his fruit was sweet to taste. Refresh me with apples, for I am sick with love.
Under the apple tree I awakened you. There your mother was in travail with you. There she who bore you was in travail. Set me as a seal upon your heart, for love is as strong as death. Its flashes are flashes of fire, a flame of Yahweh himself. John of the Cross. Entrado sea la esposa en el ameno huerto deseado, y a su sabor reposa el cuello reclinado sobre los dulces brazos del amado.
Clare of Assisi. Draw me after you, heavenly spouse. We shall run in the fragrance of your perfumes. I shall run and not grow weary until you bring me into the wine cellar, until your left hand is under my head and your right arm blissfully embraces me, and you kiss me with the most blissful kisses of your mouth.
John of the Cross. In the inner wine cellar I drank of my beloved. The bride has entered the sweet garden of her desire, and she rests in the light, laying her neck on the gentle arms of her beloved.
Hildegard of Bingen. O viridissima Virga. O most greening branch, hail, hail, because the heat of the sun exudes from you like the perfumes of balm. The beautiful flower came forth from you, which gave all aridness their aromas. Then the skies rained down dew on the fields, and all the earth rejoiced, because the warmth of the sun exudes from you like the perfumes of balm. The beautiful flower blossomed from you, then O sweet Virgin, you know only pure joy. The birds in the windy air build their nests in your hair. Eve turned her back on all of this, but now let there be praise to the highest.
John of the Cross. Beneath the apple tree, there I took you for my own. There I offered you my hand and restored you.
Teresa of Avila. It pleased the Lord that I should see an angel, very beautiful, his face so aflame. In his hands I saw a long golden spear, and at the end of the iron tip I seemed to see a point of fire. With this he seemed to pierce my heart several times, so that it penetrated to my womb. When he drew the spear out, I thought he was drawing my womb out with it, and he left me completely afire, with great love. The pain was so sharp that it made me utter several moans, and so excessive was the sweetness caused me by this intense pain that one can never wish to lose it, nor will one's soul be content with anything less. Love comes with a knife, not some shy question and not with fears for its reputation. Think of the spiderweb, woven across the cave where Muhammad slept. There are love stories, and there is obliteration in love. I have no more words. Let the soul speak with the silent articulation of a face.
Did you hear that winter's over? The basil and the carnations cannot control their laughter. The trees reach out their congratulations. The soul goes dancing through the king's doorway. Lilacs blush because they have seen the rose naked. New creatures whirl in from non-existence. Galaxies scatter around their feet. Have you met them? A feast is set. Listen, the wind is flowing wine. Love used to hide inside images, no more. Nothing can stay bound or be imprisoned. You say, end this poem here and wait for what's next? I will. Poems are rough notations for the music we are.
Radha to Krishna. Krishna, come quickly to meet me. Death is better for me than living in my vacant body. Why do I endure love's devouring flame?
Krishna to Radha. Leave lotus footprints on my bed of tender shoots, Radha. Let my place be plundered by your tender feet. I stroke your foot with my lotus hand. You have come far. Set your golden anklet on my bed like the sun. Consent to my love. Let elixir flow from your face to end our separateness.
Radha to Krishna. My lord, your hand is cooler than sandbalm on my breast. Paint a leaf design with deer musk here on love's vessel. Lover, draw paint glossier than a swarm of black bees on my eyes. Kiss away the lamp-black bow that shoots arrows of love. My ears reflect the restless gleam of doe eyes, graceful lord. Hang earrings to form snares for love. Make a mark with liquid deer musk on my moonlit brow. Make a moon shadow, Krishna. Fix flowers in shining hair loosened by love play. Paint a leaf on my breasts. Lay a girdle on my hips. Twine my heavy braid with flowers. Samsara and Nirvana are the tambour and the drum. Mind and breath are the flute and the cymbal. The sound of the kettle drum rises in the sky. Birth is consumed, and the highest dharma is dowry. Day and night pass in love play. In the troop of yoginis, night becomes dawn. Yogis find delight in the embrace of the Dombi, and do not leave her for a moment, being drunk with simultaneously arisen bliss.
In the sky above the sky, there is an overgrown garden. There is the spade of the heart. When at the neck the delightful girl awakens, it is unearthed. Abandon, oh abandon your old mother. In love play, the Savara has taken the beautiful maid. My overgrown garden yields the cotton of the sky, for now the white cotton flower has blossomed. By the side of the overgrown garden, the maize garden appears. Darkness dissolves, sky blossoms forth. The Savara and the Savari drink deep. Every day the Savara perceives nothing, being giddy with love play. In 10 directions, the Savara obtains nirvana.
At midnight, the lotus is in full bloom, lit by the rays of the Vajra. The 32 yogis delight their limbs in the place of great bliss. The moon is driven to the Vajra summit. The jewel speaks of simultaneously arisen bliss. The moon drifts to the light of nirvana. The lotus is carried to the lotus pool. Bliss of cessation is purified at the moment called without things. Whoever understands this is a Buddha.
And I'm going to start out by reading this piece, which is, I'm definitely the stranger among you because I'm not a scholar. So I'm just reading about a visit to Loudun, and I've read a lot of Michel de Certeau. And the piece is called Wonder Horror. Loudun in France is a small town near Poitiers built on a hill surrounded by wide plains, a cluster of bell towers surrounded by fields. It was built on an eminence, a hilly place with circular paths surrounding the keeps. The town played a part in the religious wars favoring the Protestants in the end. Last October, I wandered on narrow streets and plazas, past the Gothic Saint-Pierre-du-Marché, Sainte-Croix, once a Renaissance church, the Palais de Justice, and many old fortifications. Each of these places were parts of one shocking story of madness and exorcism. Most of the walls had been softened and sunk by war or peace. I was following the ghost of Michel de Certeau. We walked up a hill alongside a Roman wall. The air was soft, warm, autumnal. Men were machine-blowing leaves around, plane trees, elms, and chestnuts. Towers dotted the corners of walls, one with banners. Then we came to the crossroads of the sorcerers, where the priests had come on their way to the Ursuline sisters, who then themselves walked down to the town for their public confessions. Small in size for so many immured inside, chalk limestone and yellow. Once the nuns and their novices wandered around inside singing, not just here, but in several monasteries and convents in this small hill town. A soft mist covered the plains beyond. We found pretty wildflowers growing amid the stones, including one that snapped shut when you touched a petal. And then we went back down and visited the museum where Certeau found much of his material for his book. Here were the documents he needed and used, pictures for a study of these women, and some writing by their scapegoat. A voodoo doll under glass studded with chicken feathers and the heart of a black hen. These effigies were leftovers from the exorcisms that took place in the early 17th century. This is a paper about spiritual struggle, deceit, about belief and unbelief. Who can you trust? Who is telling the truth? In a plurality of ideologies and religions, who can you believe will save you? This question haunts political and social acts as much as it does the religious. It's certainly central to the gesture of welcome and to any threshold experience. Whose speech is authentic speech? As it turns out, the possessed nuns in Loudun did not believe their exorcists, priests they already knew, enough to be saved by them. Instead, they laughed at their rituals and refused to be healed. This example of a failure of words to persuade and save was one that signaled the end of a social contract. Such a contract ended in the 20th century, too. It was a different one, an outcome of war, mass murder, and brutal ideology, but it has been signaled by a failure to believe in shared values and spoken words. In an ideal society, hosts and guests would be interchangeable, so there would be no need to name one or the other. In ancient images of greeting, as we've just seen, you see that the host and guest are engaged in a single dance that could not be performed alone. The bowing, the hands extended, the leaning heads. The dance of friendship is egalitarian and pliable. Respect is mutual. But above all, each body is free to come and go at will. Why is welcome then such a loaded subject? In his story, Guests of the Nation, the Irish writer Frank O'Connor wrote about British prisoners of war under the IRA who are welcomed into captivity, who become friends of the guards, and then are taken out and shot by their hosts. A more recent version of this horror came up in the movie The Crying Game. Both explore the way a welcome can signify capture and selection. In both, the invisible force of love hovers over all the characters' choices, but it's helpless to intervene. It turns out that complete freedom is required for a guest to be a guest, because he or she must be able to leave in order to continue being a guest rather than a hostage, possessed. The story of possession I'm telling goes like this. In the little town, Loudun, there was an outbreak of the plague from which people became dreadfully ill, fled, or more likely died. The plague found its way into the several religious houses in this town, split between Huguenots and Catholics. The streets reeked of sickness, and the corridors indoor were awash with the specters of those who had died putrefied. The nuns and their child students inside the walls tore through the halls, playing ghost tricks on each other. The plague drifted away, but in games like this, its taste remained. In this atmosphere, one Ursuline nun after another began experiencing a takeover of her mind by so-called demons, each of whom she named and placed in a specific part of her body. It could have started as child's play, hearing ghosts, acting them out, doing voices, assigning names. In any case, these forces grew large, took over, and made her utter obscenities, heresies, and speak in tongues and masculine registers. The convent, seemingly immune to diabolic forces, had been invaded. The demons made each sister whirl like a dervish, contort like a Hindu yogi, into impossible positions, back arched, supported only by her toes, and her eyes rolling back. Oddly, these contortions were similar to those of Indian mystics when in an ecstatic trance. In this case, the women turned their fury on the clergy. Certeau described the situation poetically. A plurality of heads and hearts in an enigmatic relationship. Even though the tongue is the manifestation of the inner movements, the head is deceiving in relation to the celestial, human, or bestial heads that cannot be seen. The nuns were young and ripe, like a pack of Pinocchios, half wood, half donkey, half human. Each part of their anatomy was dangerously alive on its way to daily lessons. Gales of giggles preceded them, or they succumbed to the post-plague ghouls and cried out in pain in foreign tongues. The father confessors from nearby monasteries came rushing along the winding roads to hear the sisters' confessions and to note them down, to feel their bellies and thighs and look down their throats, to attempt to rid them of their foreign agents. But the priests were unsuccessful at chasing away demons and became victims of the nuns' rebukes and abuse. Sexual innuendos were rife and closer to actual sexual experience in front of each other and the priests. The Mother Superior and others then developed a fixation on one priest in particular, whom they accused of seduction and sorcery. He was a victim of selection, a victim of the embodied imagination, too welcome and too remote. He was Father Urbain Grandier. His worldly name and good looks, his imperious manner, and his belief that clerics should not be celibate, while he acted on this belief, made him the obvious target. Certeau studied this scapegoat for some signs of credibility. After all, Grandier insisted over and over again, under excruciating grilling, that he was innocent. But no matter what he said or what he did before he said it, he was not believed. One official document described Grandier in prison like this: "Often he spoke favorably of God. We rebuked him, since on that same morning we were very certain that he was a magician, and on that basis we knew very well that when he spoke of God favorably, he meant to speak of the devil, and when he detested the devil, he meant to detest God." Language had lost its meaning, its credibility. Grandier was in a no-win situation at the heart of a double bind. Words were the problem. A vocabulary had lost its truth value. No one believed what anyone else was saying. Despite many attempts by his friends to exonerate Grandier of the charges leveled against him, his attitude, the insinuations by the sisters, and in particular by the Mother Superior, Jeanne des Anges, he was burned at the stake in the public square. By this time, there were people, including medical doctors, coming from everywhere to watch the nuns writhe and speak filth, interpret their words, and now to watch the public burning of the selected seducer and sorcerer. Literally thousands came to watch this outdoor theater. Those Capuchins who had promised Grandier that they would strangle him before setting him alight did not do him that favor, but broke their promise with flaming straws. After this horrendous event, a new exorcist was called in. This was Jean-Joseph Serin, a young Jesuit who was known to be a hypochondriac, but kind and intelligent. He came with the specific purpose of ridding Jeanne des Anges of her devils so that she could help liberate the other sisters from their demons and bring false accusations to an end. Right away, she admitted she had made a mistake about Urbain Grandier. Serin accomplished the exorcism in a radical manner. He invited Jeanne's devils to enter into himself. He summoned them into his own body in order to free her. He became their willing host. And subsequently, he had to be locked up, raving and insane, for 3 years, during which time he jumped out a window, injuring himself permanently, and constantly resisting the impulse to do it again. He believed that God had thrown him out, and he might as well do the same. He was in the grip of the satanic, having asked the demons too many times, why is there evil in a world that God made? Jeanne des Anges, in fact, was cured by Serin's act and became a traveling speaker and healer. The other nuns quieted down and returned to their prayerful lives. And finally, Serin himself was saved by the mild encouragement of a priest who said it might just be possible that Jesus loved him. At that moment, he believed, as Simone Weil did in her little prose poem, Prologue, that maybe, just maybe, he was still loved. The demons fled, and Father Serin went on to become very active as a writer, and wrote letters to Jeanne until the day she died. He said then that she was the only person, ironically, to whom he could speak the truth. He was a man Certeau trusted, a suffering, neurotic, outsider priest who asked the same questions Certeau would ask during his investigations in Loudun. Were these women inhabited by evil spirits who filled the spaces left by a disappearing God? Or worse yet, were they performing just for the fun of it? Certeau saw the event as marking a change in consciousness. Quote, devils and angels enter the human world as the cosmology that placed them in a celestial hierarchy begins to crumble. Conversely, men become angels or devils. The boundaries blur. For Certeau, the past, like an image of heavenly entities in a Gnostic dream, has the deformed features of science fiction. The past wears the cast-offs of the future that we inhabit, and vice versa. What are these withered textiles and charts lying around, these sketches of half-made moderns, these stories of their habits and myths. A slight feeling of disgust at his subject pervades his writing about it. Because who, after all, would not feel revulsion in the face of human actions through time? We know too much how evil we have been and how rude to our potential in belittling, burning, and lynching those who are human too. Naturally, Certeau's scholarship forms itself around a central emotion, that same one, wonder, horror. Creatures of science fiction are like ancestral projections of partial people moving across the screen of our imaginations. You might recognize an eye or a fingernail, a kind of helmet or a movement like that of a crab. But these ancestors of ours inhabited the planet and populated it with artifacts that still shape our views, especially of them. The examination of the past quickly becomes an aghast question. Who are these strangers? The word is the root of alienation, lies, or as Certeau says, the tongue tells the secret of multiple hidden faces. Certeau's two books, The Mystic Fable and The Possession at Loudun, are the ones where issues of belief become for Certeau the only important ones. Experience of the one, God, also called the truth, and the subsequent problem of describing authentically to others this experience became his central interest and problem. How can you identify the authenticity of a supernatural experience? Through words or through gestures? Because Certeau was a poetic writer, he might have held an inquisition in which he asked another poet, "Do you believe what you just said? Or was it just for effect? Who were you trying to please?" Much of his writing seems driven by the loss of his own certainties. It's as if he had suffered a terrible disappointment and was devoting his life to deciding if it was a misreading of circumstances or if he had been duped. Many poets produce words in order to claw at their syntax and sound for echoes of an original first voice. This is one way the borderline between the supernatural and the natural is explored. When Certeau came upon the story of the possession at Loudun, he found a version of this trauma that was perfectly contained. Almost everyone involved was lost and behaved dishonestly. The Ursuline nuns of Loudun, usually dissected in terms of erotomania, for Certeau were indicators of a new age. In this piece of history, he found two things: the democratization of religious experience and the faith of his own childhood in Grandier's words and behavior. Certeau is often a convoluted writer with a complex poetics that subverts his subject rather than upholding it. But when he was writing about Grandier's courage, his return to the simplicity of the liturgy to get him through his agony, Certeau's prose suddenly becomes clear. His pleasure is transparent. In some strange way, it was as if the subject of the book, Whom to Believe, was enacted in Certeau's relationship to his own writing. One believes the person who speaks clearly from the heart. What this means to the subject in this seminar is that a shift in the social contract, the openness to the new, is often accompanied by a breakdown in vocabulary, a chaos of verbal misunderstanding, suspicion at what is being said, torture in order to induce words that can be believed, rather than a conversation without restraints. It can be accompanied by demonic rage, babble, and a hard heart. In the Loudun spectacle, we see the nuns invaded by unwelcome demons, a priest who embraces them and carries them away, and the way everyone's sanity is restored by the liturgy or random encounters with kindness. For Certeau, the salvation of the world rests with those who have the courage to welcome demons as the only way of understanding them. And this can be read in one word, which he favored: open, being open to the world and experience. And also with those who wander outside the gates, those who survive by not being seen, by not being subjected to the perils of welcome. The worst thing for them is to be identified, to be noticed. Welcome, in this case, can stand in for being caught. Then there are those like Grandier who only in their humiliation and time of rejection become fully human. The outsider figure emerges again and again in Sartre's writings under different names, as one generally despised or ignored, but joyful, as one for whom knowing oneself is the same as knowing God. I think this perception sets Sartre apart from his contemporary theorists and accounts for some of the subterfuges he uses in his sentences. His sentences become overly complex, even contradictory. This may be the fault of the translator. But I can't help wondering if he's faltering in his rhetoric because it's not the one that he yearns to use, that of the storyteller, the theologian, or the poet. The other person in Loudun whom Sartre could recognize was Father Saran, who wrote lyric poetry that Sartre admired. Here is a short section of one of his poems that resonates with Sartre's own credo. Indeed, he asked it to be read aloud at his own funeral in Paris. I want to run through the world and live the life of a lost child. I now have the spirit of a wanderer after giving away all my goods. It's the same thing to me whether I live or die. All that I ask is for love to remain with me. So that's that section. And now I'm going to leap centuries forward and show a little video I made a few years ago about Simone Weil, the philosopher. It's 9 minutes long, and I made it when I was teaching at the University of California with the help of a grad student and the narrator, the woman who narrates the text, Babette Mangold, who was a filmmaker. The poem itself was a prose poem, actually, and she did read Baudelaire and loved him, so I have a feeling that was in her. It was written during the Second World War when she was on her way to London to continue her work with the French resistance. And for anyone who doesn't know, she died at age 34 before the war ended in a hospital for industrial workers. Her choice of that place for her last days is symbolic of a life lived in service to the idea of solidarity, though solitary was her path. She was really one of de Certeau's women and people. And I do think it speaks to the subject of the seminar, mad as it is.
Il entra dans ma chambre et dit « Misérable, qui ne comprend rien, qui ne sait rien, viens avec moi et je t'enseignerai des choses dont tu ne te doutes pas. » Je le suivis. Come with me, he said, and led her from her room. His was a body built of voice and almost nothing else. His promises were these, to teach her with his words what she did not know. She was obedient. Il m'emmena dans une église. Elle était neuve et laide. Il me conduisit en face de l'autel et me dit « Agenouille-toi ». Je lui dis « Je n'ai pas été baptisé ». Il me dit « Tombe à genoux devant ce lieu, avec amour, comme devant le lieu où existe la vérité. » J'obéis. To a church, then, they went, and he ordered her to kneel. I told him I felt like an impostor at an altar, but he insisted, saying, imagine it is the place where you will learn what it is to know. So I kneeled and waited, and learned nothing. He took her next to a street she would not remember any more than she would remember the international sign for amnesia. the war was underway, and her worst fears about humanity and technology were being confirmed. She followed him towards some stairs leading to an attic with 2 chairs, a table, and a view. She could see the city, a shiny river, then the moon, the stars, and a new dawn climb upon the glass. For a long time, she had believed that the materialistic perspective was the right one, as long as you did not believe in it. Order is an intermediary between a multiplicity of conditions and a thing. But what is that thing? The void? God? Nous étions seuls, il parla. Parfois, quelqu'un entrait, se mêlait à la conversation, puis partait. Parfois, il se taisait, tirait d'un placard un pain et nous le partagions. Ce pain avait vraiment le goût de pain. Je n'ai jamais plus retrouvé ce goût. We slept well, stretched out on the floor, and the sweetest sleep came over me. Puis, je me réveillais et je buvais la lumière du soleil. Un jour, il me dit, maintenant, va-t'en. But then he made me kneel again, this time in hell, holding onto his knees, while he told me that it was time for me to leave. Je le suppliais de ne pas me chasser, mais il me jeta dans l'escalier. Out on the streets, alone, she felt like an article that was coming apart. She did not know where she was or where it could be found. She walked through the street aimlessly, away from that room. Je n'ai jamais essayé de retrouver cette chambre. There is in poverty a kind of poetry like no other. It is the poetry that is written in the flesh of one who shows a complete recognition of her own suffering. The sight of cherry blossom in spring would not go straight to the heart if their fragility were not so recognizable. Beauty itself must be viewed either at a great distance or with full awareness of its weakness. Stars are changeless but very far away. White flowers are here, but at every moment close to annihilation. In the same way, a person can love God with a pure love only if God is seen as human, in the sense of weak, humiliated, and close to destruction, or more so when God is seen at an even greater degree of absence, that is, as one who can only be present as a little piece of matter meant to be eaten. Je ne peux pas m'empêcher, quelquefois, avec crainte et remords, de me répéter une partie de ce qu'il m'a dit. Mais comment savoir si je me rappelle exactement? I will never remember what he said, since he is not here now to tell me. All around her, the cold winter air was full of sunshine. The branches of the trees were not yet ready for spring. Where will she ever feel at home? Ma place n'est pas dans cette mansarde. Elle est n'importe où, dans un cachot de prison, dans un de ces salons bourgeois pleins de bibelots et de peluches rouges, dans une salle d'attente de gare. But my place is not in that attic. I know he does not love me. How could he? Yet, somehow and sometimes, deep inside of me, I feel a tremor of fear, thinking that perhaps, in spite of everything he does, il m'aime.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Fanny Howe. It's a real honor for me and a real pleasure to be speaking in the same event as Fanny Howe, whose work I have been quietly obsessed with for, I realize now, almost 20 years, probably. So it's a little daunting. I'm a little scared. I have been writing about the history of Christian mysticism and about 20th century philosophical and theological and psychoanalytic engagements with Christian mysticism for a long time. I keep circling around some of the same texts, and I want to today or tonight more than explicate those texts for you, somewhat in the spirit of the opening piece, and somewhat in the spirit of the film, the beautiful little film, small film that we just saw, Fanny Howe's about Simone Weil. I want to read to you from other people's work. And there's going to be little bits of me in here, but it's going to be much more others. Okay, so I'm going into a formal mode. I'm often accused of over-citation, of letting my writing be invaded by unassimilated others. I am clawing at the same set of texts, the same words. I just borrowed clawing from you, I just stole it. Scratching out my own. I found myself with old essays wanting to white out everything that I wrote except for occasional phrases, and to let the text that I'm juxtaposing from the 20th century, from the Middle Ages, from the early modern period, sit next to each other and do their own work. That's part of what I want to do today, mostly focused on the Middle Ages. Begin with the title, Hosting Uninvited Guests, Sacred Eros. Why uninvited? Isn't the mystic the one who invites God in? And the one whom God invites in, into his wounds, into his Godhead. My dove in the cleft of the rocks, in the crannies of the wall, show me your face, let your voice sound in my ears. Song of Songs 2:14. Bernard of Clairvaux. How joyously she explores the crannies, the many and varied resting places and mansions which are in her father's house, in which he lodges his children according to the deserts of each. And indeed, she does the only thing she can for now, and rests there in memory, entering in imagination into the heavenly home which is above. In the 61st sermon of his Sermons on the Song of Songs, the clefts in the rock are Christ's wounds, and a place of refuge for the soul. And really, where is there safe rest for the weak except in the Savior's wounds? There, the security of my dwelling depends on the greatness of his saving power. From the wounds, Bernard writes, I can suck honey from the rock and oil from the flinty stone. I can taste and see that the Lord is good. Through the clefts in Christ's body, the secret of his heart is laid open. The mighty mystery of loving is laid open to the tender mercies of our God, in which the morning sun from on high has risen upon us. Surely his heart is laid open through his wounds. Alfred of Rivaux, Bernard's younger contemporary, writes in a rule for the life of a recluse, the recluse being his sister. From the rock streams have flowed for you, wounds have been made in his limbs, holes in the wall of his body, in which, like a dove, you may hide while you kiss them one by one. Your lips, stained with his blood, will become like a scarlet ribbon, and your word sweet. Angela Foligno, in the 13th century, is just one of the many women who purported to live what Aelred wrote. Angela. He then called me to place my mouth to the wound on his side. It seemed to me that I saw and drank the blood, which was freshly flowing from his side. His intention was to make me understand that by this blood he would cleanse me. But this doesn't just happen. In the prologue to the life of Marie of Oigny, James of Vitry, died 1240, this is 1228, 1230s, reminds Archbishop Fulk of Toulouse of the wonderful things Fulk had seen on an earlier visit to the diocese of Liège. James of Vitry. You saw many holy women in the lily gardens of the Lord, and you rejoiced. You saw crowds of them in different places where they scorned carnal enticements for Christ, despised the riches of this world for the love of the heavenly kingdom, clung to their heavenly bridegroom in poverty and humility, and earned a sparse meal with their hands. Although their families abounded in great riches, yet they preferred to endure distress and poverty and were forgetful of their people and the home of their father, rather than abounding in riches which had been wrongly acquired or remaining in danger among worldly pomp. You saw holy women serving God, and you rejoiced. With what zeal did they preserve their youthful chastity, arming themselves in their honorable resolve by salutary warnings, so that their only desire was the heavenly bridegroom. Widows served the Lord in fasts and prayers, in vigils and in manual labor, in tears and entreaties. Just as they had previously tried to please their husbands in the flesh, so now all the more did they attempt to please their heavenly bridegroom in the spirit. Frequently they call to memory the words of the apostle that the widow that lives in pleasure is dead. And because holy widows share with any of the saints who are in need, they washed the feet of the poor, made hospitality their special care, applied themselves to works of mercy, and promised to bear fruit 60-fold. You have seen holy women serving the Lord devoutly in marriage, and you rejoiced. A woman teaching their son in the fear of the Lord, keeping honorable nuptials in an undefiled wedding bed, giving themselves to prayer for a time, and returning afterwards together again in fear of the Lord, lest they be tempted by Satan. Many abstained from illicit embraces with the assent of their husbands, and leading a celibate life, indeed an angelic life, they were so much the more worthy of the crown, since they did not burn when put into the fire. In 1211, Fulk had admired the crowds of virgins, widows, and chaste matrons praying, fasting, and keeping vigils while remaining in the world, earning their sparse livings through manual labor, and caring for the poor, the ill, and the dying. Although James reports that some shameless men hostile to religion slander these women, he insists on their abstinence, their virtue, their sanctity. The Liège women not only brought together contemplation and withdrawal from the world, Mary and Martha, with charitable and self-sustaining action within it, but also attained rapturous states of ecstatic union with God. They worked to receive their guests, although no amount of work guaranteed his arrival. James. Other women who were wasting away with such an intimate and wondrous state of love in God that they were faint with desire, and for many years they could only rarely rise from their beds. There was no other cause for their sickness except him, since their souls had melted with desire. Others were overwhelmed with continual tears, or so wrapped outside of themselves with such a spirit of inebriation that while God was on his couch, and they rested in that holy silence throughout almost an entire day, they neither spoke nor were they sensible of anything external to them. Loud noises could not wake them, nor bodily pains pull them away from the peace of God. These are women that became known as Beguines. These are male stories about the Beguines. But the Beguines also wrote. Mechthild of Magborg, a Beguine, flourished around 1250, wrote a book called The Flowing Light of the Godhead, in which she describes the soul in one part of which, it's a long and complex book, in one part of which she describes the soul as a lady who dresses herself in the virtues so as to be prepared to welcome the prince. After much waiting, in which the soul watches other holy people dance, the young man comes and says to her, Mechthild, "Young lady, my chosen ones have shown off their dancing to you. Just as artfully should you now follow their lead." The soul replies, "I cannot dance, Lord, unless you lead me. If you want me to leap with abandon, you must intone the song. Then I shall leap into love, from love into knowledge, from knowledge into enjoyment, and from enjoyment beyond all human sensations. There I want to remain, yet want also to circle higher still." Their dance is recorded in song. The young man sings, "Through me into you, and through you from me," while the soul responds, like the alternatively joyful and despondent bride of the Song of Songs, "Willingly with you, woefully from you." Some people call this bridal mysticism. Others insist on the centrality of Mary. Yet Mechthild makes explicit her preference for erotic over maternal metaphors in her conception of the relationship between the soul and Christ. And to speak of a bride elicits in our minds a set of images that do not do justice to the ferocity of her desire. Weary of the dance, the soul says to the senses that they should leave her so that she might refresh herself. The senses, wanting to stay with the soul, offer a series of refreshments in which they too might take part. The blood of martyrs, the council of confessors, the bliss of the angels, and finally the milk of the Virgin enjoyed by the Christ child. To all of these offers of refreshment, the soul replies, "That is child's love, that one suckle and rock a baby. I am a full-grown bride. I want to go to my lover." Although there the senses will go completely blind, the soul asserts that her true identity is found in the nature of God. A soul in water does not drown. A bird in the air does not plummet. Gold in fire does not perish. Rather, it gets its purity and its radiant color there. God has created all creatures to live according to their nature. How then am I to resist my nature? I must go from all things to God, who is my Father by nature, my brother by his humanity, my bridegroom by love, and I his bride for all eternity, from all eternity. Just as Mechthild will insist that she is both God's child by grace and God's child by nature, so here she claims to be daughter, sister, and bride of Christ, multiplying metaphors, all from the Song of Songs, without undermining the eroticism, intensifying the eroticism of the dance of love in which the dialogue appears. Identification with the guest does not preclude, but seems rather to follow from the intensity of her desire. After asserting the commonality of her nature with that of the divine, the bride of all delights, this is Mechthild, goes to the fairest of lovers in the secret chamber of the invisible Godhead. There she finds the bed and the abode of love prepared by God in a manner beyond what is human. Our Lord speaks, "Stay, Lady Soul. What do you bid me, Lord? Take off your clothes. Lord, what will happen to me then? Lady Soul, you are so utterly innatured in me that not the slightest thing can be between you and me." Then a blessed stillness that both desire comes over them. He surrenders himself to her, and she surrenders herself to him. What happens to her then, she knows, and that is fine with me. But this cannot last long. When two lovers meet secretly, they must often part from one another inseparably. As long as the soul remains in the body, the lovers can only meet fleetingly. The intensity of Mechthild's desire, the soul's desire, and fusion with the divine both demands the use of erotic language and subverts it, for the body cannot sustain the experience of the divine embrace. The body can't forever host the divine embrace. The suffering to which God's presence and absence give rise is then itself taken up as crucial to the path of desire for hosting of Christ. But is this just another tale of female abandonment to a male other? A woman not only allowing, but preparing herself to be wrapped into God. The Latin words are all the same. The interplay of suffering and desire is also crucial to the poetry and prose of another Beguine, Hadvik. Hadvik has a long poem called The Seven Names of Love, in which she makes what I hope is the first recorded use of this metaphor. Hell is the seventh name of this love wherein I suffer. For there is nothing love does not engulf and damn, and no one who falls into her and whom she seizes comes out again, because no grace exists there. As hell turns everything to ruin, in love nothing else is acquired but disquiet and torture without pity. Forever to be in unrest, forever assault and new persecution, to be wholly devoured and engulfed in her unfathomable essence, to founder unceasingly in heat and cold, in the deep, insurmountable darkness of love. For Hadvik, the constant comings and goings of love are a source of continual suffering, for the soul is caught between the ecstasy of the divine presence, love's unrelenting demands for fidelity, and the constant threat of God's absence. Suffering is the source of, the site of, erotic desire. As the scholar Karma Lakri argues, Aggression, violence, masochism, and dark despair are as fundamental to the visions of some women mystics as the tropes of marriage and languorous desire. For Lockery, this kind of excessive violent desire is queer in its effects, exceeding and hyperbolizing its own conventionality and fracturing the discourses of mystical love and sex. Hadvig, like Mechthild, argues that this suffering, love itself, becomes a part of the soul's identification with and union with Christ. She writes in a letter to her fellow Beguines from whom she had been separated, "We all indeed wish to be God with God, but God knows there are few of us who want to live the cross with him and pay humanity's debts to the full." No, I missed that. I flubbed that. We all indeed wish to be God with God, but God knows there are few of us who want to live as human beings with his humanity, or want to carry his cross with him, or want to hang on the cross with him and pay humanity's debt to the full. This demand that the soul identify with Christ in his suffering humanity doesn't preclude a desire for the divine, but best expressed through the language of eroticism. Again, like Mechthild, Hadvig, particularly in her visions, makes use of imagery derived from the Song of Songs as a basis for her understanding the union between the soul and Christ. She prepares for these moments. One day while at Matins, she writes, "My heart and my veins and all my limbs trembled and quivered with eager desire, and as often occurred with me, such madness and fear beset my mind that it seemed to me I did not content my beloved, that my beloved did not fulfill my desire, so that dying I must go mad, and going mad I must die." This leads Hadvig to desire that humanity should, to the fullest extent, be one in fruition with that of Christ, so that she then might grow up in order to be God with God. The vision that follows is the fulfillment of that desire. Looking at the altar, she first sees Christ in the form of a child of 3 years, holding the Eucharistic bread with his right hand and the chalice with his left. The child then becomes a man and administers the sacrament to Hadvig. After that, he came himself to me, took me entirely in his arms, and pressed me to him. And all my members felt his in full felicity, in accordance with the desire of my heart and my humanity, so that I was outwardly satisfied and transported. Also then, for a short while, I had the strength to bear this. But soon, after a short time, I lost that manly beauty outwardly in the sight of his form. I saw him completely come to naught, and so fade and all at once dissolve, that I could no longer recognize or perceive him outside me, and I could no longer distinguish him within me. Then it was to me as if we were one, without difference. After that, I remained in a passing way in my beloved, so that I wholly melted away in him, and nothing any longer remained to me of myself. Hadvig's work stands, in Hadvig's work, the soul both stands in a feminine bridal relationship to the divine, and the divine is turned into Lady Love, feminine, sought after, the unattainable female object of desire for the soul as a knight errant in quest of his lady. Love can't be clearly identified with Christ, the Holy Spirit, God the Father, or the Trinity. It has no fixed theological referent. Hadvig continually shifts and overlaps these different theological readings. The poems again stress the cruelty of love and the anguish to which her demand for desirous fidelity reduces the knight. Hadvig, sometimes kind, sometimes hateful, sometimes far, sometimes to hand. To him who endures this with loyalty of love, that is jubilation. How love kills and embraces in a single action. Those who are knight-errants in love live in an endless oscillation between darkness and light, divine presence and absence. The knightly soul is suspended between activity, laying siege to love in desire and fidelity. The brave, one poem advises, should strike before love does. And recognition that the knight's best success lies in the suffering he undergoes when shot by love's arrow. Does this help? In the dialogues that make up Marguerite Perret's The Mirror of Simple Souls, Perret similarly employs the feminine figure of love as the most prominent representation of the divine. She goes even further than Hadvig, suggesting that while Christ and Christ's body play a crucial role in the path of the soul, the feminine soul, to union with feminine love, ultimately the role of the body and of Christ will be surpassed. We don't really need men anymore by the end of the Mirror of Simple Souls. Instead, the female soul engages in a loving dialogue, both with Lady Love and with the feminine trinity, giving the text an intensely homoerotic valence, absent in Mechtel's account of the love between the bridal soul and Christ, and even absent in Hadwick's transvestism, in which the soul becomes male in order to pursue Lady Love. Perret's love and soul provide a representation of those souls who have become so free of all created things, including will and desire, that they are indistinguishable from the divine. The coming to naught, the so innatured of oneself that we saw in Hadwick and in Mechthild, becomes the central theological, mystical focus of Perret's book. Perret describes in a series of different poetic metaphors the process through which the annihilation of the soul occurs. The final version, the one I want to read, the final story that the soul tells herself in order to understand herself as destroyed. The soul imagines a series of tests posed by God. She asks herself, and this is a passage I've cited in almost every paper I've ever written. It's not in Sensible Ecstasy, but anyway, this is the one I'm scratching out. The soul imagines a series of tests. She asks herself, what would it be like, I'm getting the phrasing wrong. She asks herself, as if he himself were asking me. So her imagination is, as if he himself, God is male here, were asking me how I would fare if I knew, which is not unimportant, as if he himself were asking me how I would fare if I knew that he could be better pleased, that I should love another better than him. At this my sense failed me, and I knew not how to answer, nor what to will, nor what to deny. But I responded that I would ponder it. And then he asked me how I would fare if it could be that he could love another better than me. And at this my sense failed me, and I knew not what to answer, or will, or deny. Yet again he asked me what I would do and how I would fare if it could be that he would will that someone other love me better than he. And again my sense failed, and I knew not what to respond, no more than before. But still I said that I would ponder it. Using the imaginative meditative practices recommended within her contemporaries, the literature, devotional treatises of her contemporaries, as a means of participating in and identifying with Christ's passion, Perret here enacts a trial of love, reminiscent of those of secular courtly literature. The trial leads to the death of the will and of the desire, that same desire more often elicited and exploited through meditative practices. In acquiescing to demands that she go against her desire to love and be loved by God alone, the soul, in her own words, martyrs herself, martyrs her will and her love, thereby annihilating all creatureliness and paradoxically attaining a union without distinction within the divine. Perret takes the cultural stereotype of the patient bride who will submit to anything in fidelity to her bridegroom and converts it into an account of how the souls fall into nothingness. Her language is itself the apprehension of her full share in the divine being. Like Mechthild, who insists that the soul is God's child by nature, thereby challenging late medieval versions of the doctrine of grace, Perret stresses throughout the mirror the ways in which the soul, by emphasizing and embracing her sinfulness, her abjection, and her humility, can become one with God. Most crucially, as Nicholas Watson argues, Perret shows the soul achieving mystical annihilation of her own volition by telling herself stories. This particular story both depends on and subverts the hierarchically ordered gendered expectations, the hierarchically ordered expectations about the relationship between God and the soul, the host and the stranger of late medieval culture. According to Marguerite Perret, you can invite annihilation, your own or the guests, your own and the guests. Marguerite Perret was burned at the stake as a heretic on the Place de Grève in Paris in 1309. One final bit of text. Meister Eckhart preaching a sermon on Luke 10:38. Jesus entered into a little village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her home. Eckhart cites the Latin. The sermon opens. I have begun with a few words in Latin that are written in the Gospel, and in German this means, our Lord Jesus went up into a little town and was received by a virgin who was a wife. It's close. Martha, the virgin who is the wife. Mary and Martha, receiving the Lord in the little town, becomes the soul of the little town in which God is received. And Eckhart calls upon the soul to be both virgin and wife, arguing that the more virgin, the more wifely, the more fruitful, that the more one stripped oneself of attachment to creaturely things, the more fully one is able to serve the Lord and to serve others within the world. Some words from this sermon. Every attachment to every work deprives one of the freedom to wait upon God in the present time, and to follow him alone in the light with which he would guide you in what to do and what to leave alone, free and renewed in every present moment, as if this were all that you ever had or wanted or could do. I want to read that again because that was bad. Every attachment to every work deprives one of the freedom to wait upon God in the present and to follow him in the light with which he would guide you in what to do and what to leave alone, free and renewed in every present moment, as if this were all that you ever had, ever wanted, or could do. Here, God's ground is my ground, and my ground is God's ground. Here I live from what is my own, as God lives from what is his own. It is out of this inner ground that you should perform all your works, without asking why. I say truly, so long as you perform your works for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, or for God's sake, or for the sake of your eternal blessedness, and you work them from without, you are going completely astray. You may well be tolerated, but it is not the best. Because truly, when people think that they are acquiring more of God in inwardness, in devotion, in sweetness, and in various approaches than they do by the fireside or in the stable, you are acting just as if you took God and muffled his head up in a cloak and pushed him under the bench. Whoever is seeking God by ways is finding ways and losing God. Who in ways is hidden, who is hidden from ways, the German way. But whoever seeks God without ways will find him as he is in himself, and that human being will live with the Son, and he is life itself. Go completely out of yourself for God's love, and God comes completely out of himself for love of you. And finally, from Sermon 52, blessed be the poor in spirit. If it be the case that a human being is free of all created things, and of God and of himself, and if it also be that God may find a place in him in which to work, then I say that so long as that is in a human being, he is not poor with the most intimate poverty. For it is not God's intention in his works that a human being should have in himself a place for God to work. Poverty of spirit is for a human being to keep so free of God and of all his works that if God wishes to work in the soul, God himself is the place in which God wants to work, and that God will gladly do. So that a human being should be so poor that he should not be or have any place in which God could work. When human beings cling to place, they cling to distinction. Therefore, I pray to God that he may free me of God. For my real being is above God, if we take God to be the beginning of created things. For in the same being of God, where God is above being and above distinction, there I myself was. There I willed myself and committed myself to create this human being. Therefore, I am the cause of myself in the order of my being, which is eternal, and not in the order of my becoming, which is temporal. And therefore, I am unborn, and in the manner in which I am unborn, I can never die. In my unborn manner, I have been eternally, and am now, and shall remain eternally. What I am in the order of having been born, that will die and perish, for it is mortal, and so it must in time suffer corruption. In my birth, all things were born, and I was the cause of myself and of all things. And if I would have wished it, I would not be, nor would all other things be. And if I did not exist, God would also not exist. That God is God, of that I am the cause. If I did not exist, God too would not be God. There is no need to understand this.